Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Something is Up. I'm thrilled and grateful to have with us today Joe Murgia. Joe is a talented director of photography and camera operator with lots of experience in very successful TV productions. For many years, Joe had a deep fascination with the subject of UFOs, which are now called UAPs or unidentified anomalous phenomena. This interest, very much like mine, was boosted by an article in the New York Times in December 2017, which exposed a secret US government program called OSAP and its sub-program called ATIP, which were fully committed and dedicated to the study of UFOs on the part of the US government. Joe also runs the website ufojoe.net, where he shares invaluable information with the UFO research community and the public at large, so I highly recommend to check it out. I've been following Joe's work for quite some time, and I finally had the pleasure to spend some time with him in person in Palo Alto last October, where we met for the first annual symposium of the SOL Foundation. In this episode, we will explore some of the recent developments in UFO research and the disclosure process as a whole, which seems to be unfolding in front of us every day. Join us for this fascinating conversation, and please, if you enjoy the video, press the like button and subscribe to the channel, as it will help us to reach more people and create more content for all of you. Thank you very much, and without further ado, enjoy the conversation with Joe.
It's been 7 months
since
we met.
7 months. 7 months. So, very brief background. I've been following you for quite a long time now, at least since 2017, when I started looking at this topic, which what we're going to talk about today is the UAP phenomenon, or UFO, the old days, and everything that it's happening, mostly from a geopolitical perspective and societal perspective. And I want your input, because you're a real expert on this topic. And then we met in person for the first time in Palo Alto in October, I believe was, for the SOL conference organized by the SOL Foundation, Gary Nolan, and Dr. Skafish, right? And it was a pleasure to meeting you in person and meeting a lot of other people in this community in person.
I think my favorite part about the conference was meeting people who I had never met before, coming up to me and saying, "Oh, I know you. I follow your work," which I was not expecting. So yeah, and meeting you was one of the highlights too. You had some of the better questions for the people speaking.
Thank you. I came to the conference, so I've been following this topic since 2017, and I'm gonna ask you to give an overview of your experience with this topic from the beginning, because the audience there might be a mixed audience looking at this. Initially, not a big audience. I hope that this will change. But basically, most of the people that know me, all the people around me, or in my sphere, let's say, might not be following this topic. Might not know a lot about this topic. So I want to start with an overview of why this topic is important and where we are, and then go more in details about the latest news and what's actually happening as we speak in the community, and there might be a conversation that interests more people that follow this topic regularly.
Okay.
Basically, so I approach this topic as just because I'm a computer engineer by background. I'm a technologist. I've been in the startup world in Europe for more than 20 years. I've never followed this topic as a passion prior to 2017. And 2017 was the date that, December 2017, that the New York Times and then Politico published two very important articles on a secret program that the US Defense Department was running a couple of decades ago, a decade or so ago, I believe. And that program was called OSAP. And as part of that program, another initiative called ATIP was unveiled to the larger public. And the people that unveiled that initiative were among the people that were actually driving that initiative forward, in particular, Lou Elizondo, who was at the helm of that initiative inside the Department of Defense. And from there, that article opened up this topic to, let's say, a much wider audience than before, I would say. I don't know if you agree with that.
No, I definitely agree.
But this topic is not new. There have been programs inside the US government and other governments, and they've been reporting about this topic for 80 plus years, right? Since the end of World War II. And so a lot of people were not new to the UFO phenomenon, now called UAP, when in 2017, the New York Times published that article, because the history was already extremely rich. The number of books, the number of publications, the number of very high-profile people inside the US government and inside other governments that talked about this topic were already numerous, right? So how did you get close to this topic? And can you tell me a bit of the background of how you started following it? Because you've been then a really active member of this community and contributing with incredible insight and providing very great reporting, and through your website and other channels, in particular transcribing interviews and books and articles, and providing a database now of information that is invaluable.
I appreciate that, Antonio. When I was younger, I watched programs in the U.S. on TV about UFOs, Bigfoot. There was a show called In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy from Star Trek, and I watched that. I loved it. And then in 76 or 77, whenever Close Encounters of the Third Kind came out, I went to the theater and saw that movie, and I loved it. But back then, I didn't really know that you could study this topic. So as a kid, you're like, oh, great movie, and then you move on. And then I had an interest, but nothing really where I spent a lot of time on it. And then in the mid-90s, I met my first wife, and I was pursuing her, and we were talking about UFOs, and she mentioned a book. She said, oh, you know that book? There's an alien on the cover, and my aunt saw that type of being in her house. And I'm like, what book? And she mentioned it was Whitley Strieber's Communion. So I bought that book and I read it. I'm like, okay, I'm going to have something in common with her. So I read it, and then I stopped reading it because I'm like, this is really scary. I didn't realize this was about abduction. And I was like, I don't want to read this. So I stopped reading it. And then that night I woke up on my couch. I could not move. I was paralyzed. So it's sleep paralysis, which some people say is just a normal part of being human. You wake up and you can't move, and then you struggle out of it, and it's no big deal. Other people think it's related to abductions or out-of-body experiences. Whatever it was, I woke up the next day after struggling out of it. I struggled out of it. Okay, the aliens aren't coming to get me. The next day, I'm like, I'm going to finish reading that book. So I finished reading it, and I'm like, oh, this is really good. Metaphysical stuff, meditation. And I just started reading book after book after book after book. And that's how I got into it. And around the late 90s, I started interviewing people for a public access show in Tampa, Florida, where I was living. I started a newsletter a little later after that. And then I stopped. I stopped for a while because there was nothing new going on. So I still stayed interested and I still read books, but I didn't really dive in deep again until 2017 with the New York Times article. And that started everything. I started my blog at that point. I started posting a lot on Twitter, and I just went from there. So that, 2017, the New York Times article, even with some of the mistakes, not mentioning OSAP, confusing that with ATIP. Even with that issue, that article was so important. And now, 7 years later, we're talking about crash retrievals and occupants of the craft in Congress, in congressional hearings. So as frustrated as I get sometimes with the slowness of progress and disclosure isn't coming quick enough, I have to remind myself how far we've come, in the last 7 years. It's a really, really big advancement from where we were before. Before there was like an interview here, an article here. Now it's like there are days when there's multiple articles, there are interviews on mainstream media. So yeah, as long as, as far as we really have a long way to go, but we've also made a lot of progress. So that's where I am right now.
Great. So if you had to describe what was the status on this topic before 2017, what was your, let me put it this, I would like to structure this conversation and always make very clear to the people that are listening, what are the facts that everybody can go and check out. For example, the fact that there was a congressional hearing in July 2023 with 3 government officials under oath testifying to the effect that we are not alone, we've been in contact with non-human intelligences in this planet, etc. That's a fact. You can go and look at the videos. It's a congressional hearing that is fully documented. And then there are opinions, there are theories, etc. So I would like always to make the case when we're stating some facts, let's say that these are facts comparing to opinion. Now, before 2017, what were the facts that you knew, that you were certain about, and what were the theories that you subscribed to, or even the ones that were not really convincing for you?
In 2017, or before 2017, the first modern era of ufology was June of 1947. Kenneth Arnold seeing, I think it was 9 objects in Washington that he called. He didn't say they were flying saucers. He said they skipped on the water like you would see a saucer skipping on the water, and the media took that and called it a flying saucer, which was not his description. So around then, sightings right after that started coming in large amounts. So, I mean, there are sightings before that, but that's when really things took off. And people are connecting it to when we first tested a nuclear bomb a few years before that, and then we dropped bombs, and then we were doing tests. So people speculate that whatever this was interested in our advancement with the atomic bomb. And then over the years, sightings were happening all over the world. Military sightings documented. There are documents talking about how, this is a real phenomenon, not fictitious. You can go and look at documents. So they knew something was going on. The main theory was, and I say they, I mean the government. I'm sure other governments too, but most of the documents I've seen are United States government documents. And the theory, the most popular theory was these are extraterrestrials visiting us. But there are still people who are skeptical that we're even to that point. They think it's either misidentifications or it's black technology, advanced technology that people are mistaking for non-human intelligence. I happen to think we're dealing with non-human intelligence, but we don't have the proof. We have an overwhelming amount of evidence that shows that there are craft of unknown origin flying around our skies, sometimes in restricted military airspace, and we cannot touch them. We don't, for the most part, as far as we know, they fly with impunity. We have allegedly shot some of them down, and we have crash retrieval teams, allegedly, which has come up in the last few years, as you mentioned, the hearing last year. And it's just, as far as evidence that's come out since 2017, most of the evidence that has been here, that something anomalous is here, came out long before that. Decades and decades and decades of sightings, regular people having sightings, military people having sightings. But then we had the 3 videos that came out, and those videos, as much as they're not that impressive, from the F-18 Air Force pilots with the Tic Tac was 2004, the Gimbal 2015, and the Go Fast 2015. If people look up those 3 videos, Department of Defense videos, you'll see them, you'll hear the pilots on 2 of those videos. not really knowing what they are. Those 3 videos were huge. Combine that with the New York Times article. That's why there's so much interest. And the difference back then, before 2017, I could talk about this with people, but a lot of people would give you that look like, yeah, UFOs, you're one of those people. After 2017, you still get some of that, but people are so much more open discussing it and taking it seriously. I did not really consider, I dove a lot deeper after 2017, reading more Jacques Vallée and John Keel. John Keel is a great read for people who want to look into something that, a theory that's not stuck on extraterrestrials. Gary Nolan from Stanford University, he was the one who recommended I read that. And I read it, and I'm like, this is one of my favorite books. It's a great book. He thinks it's not extraterrestrial. Keel believed, at least in this book, that they're basically native to this planet, and they operate in the electromagnetic spectrum, the part where we cannot see them, we cannot detect them. And they're basically from a higher dimension. And don't ask me to explain that scientifically. Basically, they're among us, and we can't perceive them usually unless they come down into our, what's a better word? Not sphere, but into our realm. And those were his theories back in I think the book was 1970. And then Jacques Vallée also has said he'll be disappointed if it just turns out these are extraterrestrial. And why is it important? Go ahead. We can talk about why.
No, continue.
Because people will say, and I said this the other day on Twitter, I said, if it just turns out they're extraterrestrials visiting us and collecting samples of resources for their own planet that they need, then it's really not going to change lives on this planet. It will change our view of ourselves, that we're not alone. But if it turns out that there's something here that's using humanity for something, maybe we're one of the resources, or they've had a role in shaping how life on this planet has evolved over the decades, over the thousands of years, if they've been here that long, because that might get the attention of people, because a lot of people are like, I have to pay my bills, I have to pay my rent, this will not change my life. But if it has influenced life on this planet and continues to do so, then we kind of need to know that. And if it's influencing life on this planet in a negative way, and we can somehow push back and fight back against that, I think it's the most important story in the history of humanity. Also, consciousness, as you talked about before we got on here. What does it mean for us? What are humans? What is this place we live in? We know nothing. We don't know anything about what is really reality. And other people are like, this is reality. It's physical, but there's so much more, in my opinion, to this world and us that I have studied. That's one thing about communion. He does talk about a lot of that, the metaphysical aspects of our lives. And then there's other theories that we're living in a simulation, but I will not go there right now. But there's so many possibilities, and I really want to learn and find out what the truth is, which I do not know the truth. So I'm clear. I tell people I do not know the truth. I will speculate all day long about what's going on, but I do not have any answers.
So if we want to rewind back, and correct me if I'm wrong, so you mentioned sightings starting in the 1940s. Now, from the congressional hearings, we know that there are alleged retrievals of crafts in Italy, where I'm from, already in 1933, the so-called UFO Mussolini.
Yeah, that was that was the 30s, I think, that alleged crash.
1933, yes. But if we analyze, and these are historical facts, again, these are not opinion. If we analyze from the 40s, so what we see is, first of all, U.S. government officials acknowledging that these things that appear in the sky and sometimes crash and are retrieved are non-human technology. They call it technology, and they say it's non-human. Several high-ranking officials in the Air Force, even the first director of the CIA, acknowledge that this is a topic of interest for the U.S. government. And then over the decades, although there are thousands and thousands of reports, and two of the books that I always refer people to are the books from Richard Dolan, UFO and the National Security State. There are thousands and thousands of reports. So in the following few decades, there is almost an official change of story from the US government, and starts a time of denial, right? A time of, no, this is nonsense. There's nothing to see here. Let's dismiss it. There are some commissions and some organizations that are created to debunk the sightings. The most notorious one is Project Blue Book at the beginning from the Air Force. And then finally a commission, which is the Condon Committee, is put in place to put an end to the debate about UFOs. And that was, I think, the 70s, mid-70s.
Yeah, they were worried. They were worried with all of the UFO sightings. People were calling it. It would clog up our lines of communication. And if something ever happened with an attack, we would be screwed because our lines of communication would be tied up by UFO reports. So they did their best to debunk them.
And for a lot of people, that was the end of it, right? So the reason why 2017 was incredibly significant is because for the first time after probably a couple of decades, the world population, the US populace, realized that actually the US government never stopped to investigate this phenomenon, and there were different initiatives funded by Congress to continue to investigate this phenomenon. And OSAP was one of these initiatives, right? And that opened the gate to new inquiries into why the US government was investigating this topic. And by the way, I think something is really important to say is that this program, the OSAP program, was actually sponsored by the then Senate Majority Leader, Harry Reid, the senator from Nevada, who was basically the most powerful person in the Senate. So he was not the last guy elected in Congress, but he was a member of the Gang of Eight. So he was one of the people that were in the know of the most important secrets that the U.S. military and intelligence agencies had, right? Because the Gang of Eight is the Gang of Eight people that supervise all the special access programs in the Department of Defense and the intelligence agency. So it was not the last one.
In theory, the Gang of Eight, those eight members of the Senate, in theory, 8 members of the Senate and Congress, they're supposed to be read into every program that exists in the United States government. But allegedly, there are UFO programs that they have not been read into. And that's the whole big argument, that there are programs that are unreported. And some of those programs are allegedly of crashed saucers, not of this earth.
And so to come to modern days, and 2023 was a very important year for this topic, one concept came back and became mainstream, which was the concept that there might be a conspiracy to hide the truth from the American people, but also from the people of the world, that actually non-human intelligences are real. They've been in contact with different governments on this planet. That different governments have retrieved technology originated from non-human intelligences, including full crafts, etc., etc., etc. And so what was a conspiracy theory relegated to some obscure rooms on the internet only 15 years ago, now is something that military personnel are going under oath in Congress saying these things are real, these things are happening. There are programs so secret inside the US defense establishment that not even the Gang of Eight, not even Congress knows about, and there is a constitutional crisis, is a constitutional oversight that basically means that the US, if this is true, the US is not a democracy anymore, because a democracy is based on informed citizenships, citizenry, and if the citizens are not informed, they cannot make the right decision. Democracy is hijacked by, in this case, military organization or public-private partnerships, let's say,
Right.
inside the defense community. Can you give us, so post 2017, what is the status of the UAP conversation?
I would say the biggest deal is David Grush coming forward, because like you said, before he came forward, when you would talk about, I did not spend a lot of time on crash retrievals. I did not spend a lot of time on Roswell. I thought there was definitely validity to the idea that a non-human craft crashed in Roswell in 1947, but I didn't think there would ever be any progress on that type of story. And then a few years ago, I'll tell you my personal story. It was August of 2023, I believe. And I went to go see Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp speak at they were at a Star Trek convention speaking about UFOs in one of the lectures at the conference. So I'm like, hey, I'll come check it out. I knew both of them. I knew George more than Jeremy. It was at a local hotel here in Vegas. I went and they introduced me to their friend. I hung out in their hotel room beforehand, and they're like, this is my friend Dave. So I met Dave, and that turned out to be David Grush. And I spoke with him not knowing he was going to be a whistleblower. But right away, you can tell, I started asking him questions. I'm like, this guy's really sharp. Turns out he did a 4-year investigation. He came out, when was it? Last year? He came out in the Debrief article and then the Ross Coulthart interview. Was it last year?
Yeah.
2000. Yeah. So June, I think.
April, I think.
Yeah, around
like
then.
That.
Came out, did an interview. There was an article in the Debrief and then an interview with Ross Coulthart. He said he had done a 4-year investigation. It came out with his colleagues, and they interviewed about 40 whistleblowers. Basically, some of them worked in these programs, and they put their hands on these craft that are non-human, and there were occupants, bodies we had of these, maybe not the drivers of the craft, but they were occupants of the craft. And he was a very high-ranking intelligence official, and that took the conversation from here up to here, because if sightings are one thing, but if you actually have a craft and you have bodies that are obviously not human after, studies being done, it takes the conversation to a whole new level, which I never really thought we would get. I wasn't expecting it to happen. Definitely in my lifetime, I was hopeful, but all of a sudden, here we go. And then we have Carl Nell coming forward, a former colonel, very credible person, saying, yeah, what David Grush is saying, his reputation is beyond reproach. And there are craft that we collect. Some of them are non-human in nature. And there are other people saying that. We still don't have, Antonio, we don't have the proof. It's a lot of smoke of people saying this is real. There are whistleblowers who have come forward, but we have not heard from those whistleblowers. So it's still, there are a lot of people who are skeptical of the story. I would like to see evidence of it. I would like to hear from these firsthand whistleblowers who say they worked in the program and who have spoken to Congress behind the scenes. We don't have that, but it's still something we did not have before with David Grush. The guy was giving briefings to the president on a daily basis. He was very highly respected. People have gone after him and attacked him, but he's there, and I'm sure we're going to hear more from him. And I'd say the current status is we're looking for more hearings from Congress. We had a hearing last year. We want more hearings that are supposedly coming. We had legislation last year that was really amazing that got watered down and gutted, and it turned out the legislation that was passed really wasn't strong. But that, we could talk about specifics on that. But that legislation is going to hopefully be reintroduced this year, hopefully. We had some of the top people in the Senate, 2 people who were on the Gang of 8, Marco Rubio, Chuck Schumer, talking about this. And we had Schumer and Senator Rounds basically saying after the legislation was shot down and gutted, watered down, they were on the Senate floor saying this stuff is being kept from the American people. We need to get this information out. So it's not over, and we're just kind of in a holding pattern right now to see what happens next. The president has not been great on this, but maybe something we should definitely talk about. Why would they not want this information out? And Carl Nell's interview, which was only 22 minutes, he said some really important things on that front about why a responsible leader would not want this information out, or at least let's let it out all at once.
Let's get there, but let's take a step back for a second. Again, for the audience that might not be fully in tune with this topic, right? From my perspective, we live a real surreal situation right now. And what I mean is the following. So after the 2017 article, and after the head of the ATIP initiative inside OSAP came out and leaked the story to the New York Times and Politico, and 3 videos were published, and he immediately, let's say, suffered some repercussion and from the Pentagon, but eventually the Pentagon had to retreat and admit that he was who he said he was. A series of private conversation in Congress started, right? And from 2022 onward, multiple measures inside the NDAA, so the National Defense Authorization Act, and the IAA, the National Intelligence Authorization Act, were included with language specifically talking about UFOs, so no UFOs, UAPs, non-human intelligence, etc. In the last year, the language in the NDAA included the reference to non-human intelligence, I think 24, 26 times, something like that.
It was a lot, yeah.
And again, it was an amendment to the NDAA presented by the current Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, another member of the Gang of Eight, so at the very top of the Senate of the US government. Now, prior to those amendments being presented, we've been hearing from journalists that for the last 2 or 3 years, a lot of secret, private, confidential briefings were given by a lot of intelligence people to Congress, congressional aides on the different committees, so on the House and on the Senate. And in the last few years, we had lots of politicians of some very well respected, some a bit more controversial for the mainstream, but lots of politicians taking a stand saying something is going on. We've not been, we are in the dark on certain initiatives, potentially. We believe the Pentagon is lying to us, etc., etc., etc. Again,
at the very least, even if you don't think it's non-human, there are programs, according to these members of Congress, that they are not being briefed on. So that's illegal, depending on who you talk about. So that's the big issue. Programs that exist that we fund that they don't even know about. Whether or not it's non-human or not, it's still an issue. Even if it's our technology, it's still an issue.
And what happened on top of that, at the same time that we started hearing from congressmen and senators that this kind of conversation were happening behind closed doors, Congress passed legislation to institute new organizations, new commissions. I don't know how to define them. But basically, we had a task force called the UAP Task Force. First of all, initially it was called in a different way. I don't remember the original name. Then it was renamed UAPTF. And then after a few years, the UAPTF was replaced by the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO, which was another organization mandated by Congress to investigate on this phenomenon. One of the output that these commissions had to produce were both secret, confidential reports and then public reports that could be distributed. Of course, the public reports were summaries, were only highlights of what the real reports, the real confidential reports might have said to congressmen and senators. At the same time, NASA launched their own panels and investigations and came out with their own findings, right? So in the last few years, there's been incredible activity from inside the Department of Defense, the intelligence community, and NASA, among other organizations, investigating UAPs, investigating UFOs. Now, what to me strikes me as extremely odd is that you have, as you were saying, a person by the name David Grush, who was a intelligence officer, originally with the NRO and NGA, so the National Reconnaissance Office, if I'm not mistaken, and the National Geospatial Agency, which, by the way, are the two agencies that the NRO controls all the secret satellites in the US, and the NGA is the agency that takes the photos from those satellites and has the software to analyze those photos.
Right.
So this guy was from the agency that actually controls the sky, controls space, sees everything that comes in and out of our airspace. And so this guy becomes the member of his agency assigned to the UAP task force, right? And he becomes a whistleblower. We can have a conversation about the way he does it, fully legally, fully under the protections of whistleblowers regulations in the US. And under oath says, during the course of a 4 years investigation, I've interviewed more than 40 people telling me that they have worked in secret programs, even putting their hands on crafts, technology, even bodies of non-human intelligences, non-human origins. All of these under oath. And he said, I cannot tell you much in this setting because it's a public setting, but if you get me into a skiff, into a secure facility, dear Congress, dear senators, I can tell you more about it. This was unprecedented. Together with him, there were two fighter pilots that reported their own stories, David Fravor and Graves. And at the same time, NASA, in their first conference about UAP, the director of NASA, when asked about David Grush, responded with something like, I was told that a guy in Congress said that a friend told him that another friend knew something about this, dismissing a testimony under oath of one of the top intelligence officers in Congress in a way that was disgraceful. And the only thing that I can say about the director of NASA is that either is incompetent or is corrupt. Because, again, these are facts. When you dismiss, it's your job to know about what's happening in this space. If you dismiss the testimony of David Grush that way, you're either incompetent, so you don't know how to do your job, or you are corrupt. Now, I think there is no incompetent because he's been doing this for many, many years. There's something going on. And so this is about, no matter whether you're skeptic or not in this topic, right, Joe, something is going on. And even if you don't believe that some of these things are non-human intelligence or not, there's clearly a movement that it's either trying to deceive the world public and the American public. And so for me, personally, either David Grush needs to go to prison if it's proven that he lied to the American people and to the world, or somebody else needs to go to prison. There is no middle ground.
Yeah, well, I think the bigger question is, did the people who Grush and his colleagues spoke to, did they lie to him or were they mistaken? And Arrow, the head of Arrow, the new UFO office from a few years ago, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, says they just weren't read into the right programs. They were mistaken. Those are not non-human technology. Those are our own technology. And they didn't have the need to know the full story. So that's basically their explanation. Not that David Grush is lying, but the people he spoke to were uninformed or misinformed. And it's really hard for us to judge that. I mean, I don't think that's the case. Doesn't make sense to me, but we need to hear from those people directly, because I want to know, how did you come to the conclusion that what you were working on was non-human in nature? And is there any possibility you made a mistake? And you brought up bodies. David Grush said he brought some of those folks to Capitol Hill to speak to some of the senior staff members of Congress and explained the physiology of the bodies and that they're non-human. And he said those folks had their lives changed. Those members of Congress, their staffers, were in, he called it G-lock, basically frozen, like they could not believe what they were hearing. That takes it to another level beyond, oh, you made a mistake. You know, that was our advanced new technology. You just didn't realize it. Well, if there are bodies, that argument goes out the window.
But also, it goes out the window even before that. And this is an opinion, of course. I want to underline that you can make a mistake, but but look at the consequences of that testimony, right? Or even the consequences of things that happen before that testimony. You have the UAP amendment from Schumer coming out in December after the July congressional hearing, reporting language confirming what David Grush basically saying. You have senator that keep saying the same thing. So clearly there are a lot of people in Congress that believe what David Grush said. And apart from believing, we've been told they had briefings. We've been told that even the National Security Advisor, Sullivan, had briefing on the topic. Donald Trump said that he had briefings on the topic. Obama talked about the topic in a way that is inconclusive, but saying there are things in the sky that we don't, they behave in ways that we don't understand, right? So clearly nobody dismissed what Grush was saying. And actually there is an escalation on legislative actions taking place to try and discover more. But at the same time, and I want your comment on this, there seems to be, I subscribe to the theory of Richard Dolan that seems to be a factional war among people inside the intelligence community and the Defense Department, where there is a movement trying to disclose this information or more information, let's say, to the public. And there are people trying to keep the status quo, kill the conversation, avoid any more news to come out. What is your view on this? Do you agree that there's this war going on?
Yeah, and I think Lou Elizondo first talked about that a few years ago. He said there are people who want this out, there are people who do not want this out, and there are more and more as time goes by, more people on the side of, yes, we want to get this out. And why would the people and people who are new to this, the people who do not want this out, they're not necessarily bad people. They may have very good reasons why they don't want this out right now. And Carl Nell, the former colonel, he spoke about that recently at his SALT conference, saying if you're a responsible leader and you don't have the answers to what are these things, then you're going to want to keep it quiet until you have some answers, because you don't know what this, what kind of societal disruptions that are going to take place. I mean, it's such a big part of what Carl Nell says, which kind of tells me it is real. They're so worried about how people are going to react to this, because as soon as you say that, if you're President Biden or Lloyd Austin, the DOD, what's the title? I'm drawing a blank. The head of defense for the United States government,
Secretary of Defense.
Secretary of Defense. Sorry. Say Lloyd Austin comes out and says, "Okay, ladies and gentlemen, there are certain people in our government who have known this. They've kept it quiet. Here's why. We didn't really know. But yes, there are various, or at least one non-human intelligence is here on this planet. And we really don't know much more than that. And the questions are going to flow like it's Pandora's box is open. Oh, really? Secretary Austin, are you saying that people who say they were abducted by aliens, they're telling the truth? Because now you're saying there is a non-human intelligence here. So that's not so far-fetched. So what do you think about that? I mean, the questions will keep coming. And if people as a whole, society as a whole actually accepts this as real, what will the reaction be? And people get mad at me on Twitter. They're like, people can handle it. People can handle it. I'm like, maybe they can. I'm just trying to say I understand why they're careful about putting this out, this information. Carl Nell did a really good job in that SALT lecture of explaining, he's like, I want this information to come out. I just don't think it should just be put out. Catastrophic disclosure would just be, an adversary just releasing all of the information, or one of these non-human intelligences basically showing up and saying, here we are. There's no doubt anymore. That could be catastrophic to society. So the people, like you said, I do think there are people battling against other people. We want to disclose, we don't want to disclose, and Carl Nell's in the middle. Let's do a very controlled disclosure over time, and that's what the disclosure amendment with Schumer and Rounds and the other senators, that's what the goal was, but it got shot down, so we're back to square one as far as that goes. I don't know how people would react. I don't know what your opinion is. The people I know don't really care about this, and some of the people who think it's real don't really know it's real. As Carl Nell said, it's one thing to have belief. It's another thing to know. If it just comes out, here it is, your beliefs, all this time, your beliefs are right. Here it is. Now you know. How will I react? How will you react? How will anybody react? How will religious people react? Because he mentions religion. Lou mentions religion. And, somebody like Diana Pasulka, who has studied religion, she's a professor of religious studies. She's like, I think most people can handle it okay. It's already baked into their views. I'm like, I don't know. It depends on what these beings are. Did they have any role in the creation of humanity? I mean, you start getting into that topic, and I don't know how it would go. I don't have a lot of confidence in the masses handling that information if it was put out with proof. But I still want disclosure. Me personally, I want them to release all of it right now, Antonio. I don't want controlled disclosure. I just want them to put it out, put all of it out. But I do understand the other side. I understand the people who do not want to do that. But there's also the side that Lou spoke about. And Lou, for people who don't know, again, he ran the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program after the other program closed down, OSAP. Lou ran the other program for, I think it was like 7, 8, 9 years, something like that. And he said there are people in the government that are worried if we make the announcement and we say, yeah, they're here, then they may speed up some action they were going to take decades from now. They may do it right now. In other words, attack us or whatever. So there's different views about why it would be a good idea to disclose, and there are different views on why it would be a bad idea to disclose. I want the Band-Aid torn off. I want full disclosure as soon as possible, but that's not going to happen.
I think I subscribe to the other opinion, which is I don't believe on the societal freaking out at all. I don't discard what Lou Elizondo said about we don't know enough. Maybe we don't know enough, although they've been studying this for 90 years. Clearly they know something, way more than they pretend.
I agree.
What is really worrying me is this, Joe, that sometimes we forget to have this conversation putting it inside the context of what's going on with the world right now. And we have this conversation in isolation, like the UFO topic is the only topic that is relevant, right? To me, that's not the case. So if we look at the world right now, we have some major wars, we have escalations in place, we have the Western world that decided that they need to destroy Russia for some reason, all of a sudden, and we have an escalation in the Middle East, and we have several other wars around Africa, etc. And my opinion is disclosing that we're not alone will be a transformational moment for the world, whereby all of a sudden, it's not about we all going to be friends, we need to come together, but geopolitically, you're going to have the main powers establishing tables of conversation on how to deal with this at the international level. It's not about let's be friends. It's not about this hippie sentiment. It's about pragmatically, geopolitically, the priority shift. Not disclosing, in my opinion, provides a plausible deniability blanket to the military establishment and to people that want to continue with this division and war to be able to continue to do what they want. And I'm really more afraid of those people than disclosing the fact that we've been in contact with a non-human intelligence. So I will rip the Band-Aid because I think that the benefits from a position of not knowing the facts, of course. So again, I could be wrong. I accept that my vision and my position is based on very superficial knowledge of the topic. But at the same time, I cannot forget that we're risking to go in a third world war, and nobody seems to care. Nobody seems to have a strategy to get out of it. And maybe this topic is the strategy to get out of this. Maybe opening up the conversation internationally is the way we can replace the hoax of war, the people that want war at all cost, with people that want conversations and compromise.
Yeah, you may be right. I don't know what's going to happen, so I don't really have a strong opinion. I am worried that people would not handle it well, but it all depends on what it is. I don't know what it is. I don't know what they are. I don't know what their intentions are. I don't know what their history is on this planet and their history with humans. So, but I would love it if what you're talking about happens, and I think it would to some degree. I think if we admitted it, that there's something here and it's, let's say it's not beneficial to us, doesn't really care about us, or it's taking advantage of us some way. Yeah, I think you would think all of the governments would come together. As Ronald Reagan said back, I don't know when it was, when he said it in the 80s, if we had some outside force, maybe we could put some of our differences aside. Yes, I would hope that would be the case. I just don't know. I don't know what it is. So it's kind of really hard for me to have a strong opinion on how people will react.
Okay, another question then. So I wanna know your feeling about this. Every week these days, some information come out that appears to continue to point to the fact that we are in a disclosure process, right? And Elizondo said, disclosure is not an event; it's a process. He gave you today. You reposted a tweet where Elizondo explained the 5 years comment that he made. It will take years for this process to complete, etc., etc. And yet, there seems to me that there are still some dots that even the people that are pushing for disclosure don't want to connect, things that they don't want to touch. I'll give you an example. You mentioned Diana Pasulka, right, and the books that she published. Beautiful books. Read them both. In both her books, Diana talked about a journey that she made with two scientists. And in the first book, she used pseudonyms for those scientists. The first one was it David? James, the first one, James and Tyler. James, after a while, turned out to be Professor Gary Nolan from Stanford. And then very recently, at least for me recently, this is something that I discovered just months ago, not years ago, the second pseudonym, Tyler, was mentioned to be Tim Taylor from NASA, and was mentioned to be Tim Taylor by, in the book of Chris Bledsoe. They wrote a book called UFO of God, sorry. And Chris published photos with him with Tim Taylor and NASA in Cape Canaveral, and the entire story of how NASA, CIA, FBI, NSA all came and visited him after he started reporting his events. Nobody seems to be asking questions about why Tim Taylor and NASA was involved, and allegedly confirmed to Bledsoe that they know who these entities are. They don't know what they want, but they know what they are. They've been in the know about this for decades, etc., etc., etc. So even information like this that they have not denied officially, I haven't seen a denial from NASA or from Taylor on this, but nobody is picking this up, not even the disclosure team. Why do you think this is happening?
I don't think you're going to get NASA to comment on that at all. I mean, like you said, you have Senator Bill Nelson making ignorant comments about David Grush, or purposely ignorant comments. And with Chris Bledsoe, I do think Chris Bledsoe has had real experiences. I don't know what he's experiencing. I don't know what his family has experienced as far as what they are. And as far as, Tim Taylor, is it his own personal interest in Bledsoe? Or was it an official NASA interest? Or I don't. Is that clear whether or not NASA really had an official interest in the Bledsoe family and their experiences?
Well, it's clear from what Bledsoe declared, right? And nobody refuted those claims yet. So they might be refuted. But my question is why? I mean, the journalists that are covering the topic are not going and trying to interview this guy. Why they are not pursuing this story? And instead, it seems that we're waiting. It seems that there is a press that is completely indifferent to the topic. Mainstream, let's say 99% of the press is completely indifferent to the story. And then there's a 1% of the press that actually is waiting for information to be dropped on their lap. And when stories like this come, you can see in the podcast here and there, but you don't see coverage of stories like this. And yet it seems that Bledsoe is signing for a major motion picture, and probably we're going to have a movie in a couple of years about his story. What do you make of it? What do you make about how the factions and how the press is behaving right now?
I mean, with Tim Taylor, I don't think he wants to be interviewed. I don't know if anybody has tried, but the press doesn't even want to interview Carl Nell, who's been, he hasn't been public in a big way, but he's done the SALT conference. He's been interviewed in the debrief. I haven't seen anybody say, well, I tried to reach out to Carl Nell and he just turned me down. I haven't even seen that. The press is horrible. I mean, even if you're a skeptical member of the press, when you have the leader of the Senate, Charles Schumer, and you have Senator Rounds from the other side of the aisle, a Republican, talking about how this has been kept from the American people, and you don't follow that up with interviews? Not one interview of Schumer or Rounds. The only person I've seen try to get an interview with Senator Schumer was James Fox, the documentary filmmaker, and Schumer just didn't want anything to do with him. It was in the hallway. He was getting into an elevator. But where is 60 Minutes on this? In the United States, 60 Minutes is the most respected investigative journalism television show. They've done a story on UFOs, but now that David Grush has come out and elevated the discussion to crash retrievals, they're nowhere to be found. So I would grade the American media with a big I'd say a D plus. I won't give them a total F because they're covering some aspects of this. But yeah, it's. I would have thought when Grush came out, we would have had more coverage than we did, but for some reason we didn't. And people will argue that it's Project Mockingbird, where the CIA still controls the media. I don't know if that's why it's happening, or it's just members of the media just cannot accept it on a personal level, and they don't want to go there. I mean, we had Kirkpatrick, the former head of Arrow, have a press conference about their historical report that came out saying there's nothing to see here. There's no extraterrestrial evidence. It's all black technology. It's all adversarial technology. We had members of the media, mainstream media, invited to that press conference privately, and then they reported basically without questioning anything. Why are they doing that? Are they doing the bidding of their sources in the DOD in the world of defense? Are they afraid of upsetting their sources? I don't know. Are they being told to report that for the betterment of the country? Because maybe they're being pulled aside and said, I doubt this is happening, but are they being told, oh, if this comes out, it would cause havoc with society? I don't think that's happening. But the press has been a big disappointment. To answer your question, big disappointment. And I was not expecting that. I thought it would be a little better than it has. And that's why I don't even know if a firsthand whistleblower comes forward and says, I worked in the government for 30 years. For 10 years, I worked on a non-human program where I had hands-on with the technology. It's nothing I've ever seen before. I was able to see the bodies. You want to speak to the doctors who did the examinations? Would the media cover that? I would think so, but I'm not sure at this point.
That's a good point. Yeah. Time will tell. So
I just don't have high hopes right now with the media. Put it that way. And I don't know why they're not covering this more. They did cover 2017 really, really well. It exploded. If people go look at 2017 in December 16th, the articles were everywhere. But we did not have that with David Grush. I don't know if it's because it's too hard for them to believe or because we don't have the firsthand witnesses coming forward yet.
Okay. And is there anything that gives you high hopes right now about what might happen?
Senator Rounds was interviewed a little over a week ago by Capitol Hill journalist Matt Laszlo, and he said that Arrow is starting to realize that there may be things that they don't have access to. And that's a big difference from Kirkpatrick, the former head of Arrow, who said, we have all the access we need. And we're like, really? You have access to the alleged crash retrieval program? Well, Senator Rounds is saying he's not confident that the United States Congress has been read into every program. That's a big step forward, because that's what we've been saying. If these programs exist, you have not been read into them. You don't even know they exist. You need to know where to look. If Rounds is going that direction, that is hopeful. As far as if Congress does get access to those programs, will they tell us? I don't know. That's a big concern of mine, that they will say, well, we finally got access. I'm talking about internally. We finally got access. We have oversight on these programs. Now let's try to beat Russia and China and reverse engineer this technology, but let's not tell the world. I hope that doesn't happen, but it's a big concern of mine. They don't have to show us the technology. They could just come out and say, this is not human and this is non-human. We have intact craft, and this has been going on for a long time. That would be enough to start the ball rolling if somebody like Senator Schumer or Senator Rounds said that. I don't see it happening, though. Right now, I think when you listen to Carl Nell, they're so concerned about the reaction, whether that's valid or not, that's their concern. So hopeful on some stuff, but not hopeful that they're going to tell us.
Okay. So my position is slightly different. I think when you say they're concerned about the reaction, I would say they say they're concerned about the reaction. I'm not sure they really are. I'm not sure there's not really another reason. For me, the point is that you made earlier is extremely valid, which is if this thing comes out, right, the avalanche that is going to follow, where it starts, you don't know where it ends, which means that a lot of people are risking serious time in jail, if not worse. And so I believe that they're scared about the consequences. They might not be willing to take a gamble yet because they might not know where this avalanche would end up. I don't believe in the societal repercussion. I believe in the repercussion inside the Department of Defense, inside the intelligence agency, because clearly there are thousands of people that have been involved for decades on this, right? Clearly there are people that know and that made the decision not to brief Congress anymore, not to brief presidents anymore. Clearly there are people that are breaking the law.
I don't know if there are thousands. I don't know how many people are in the know. I think you make a valid concern that some of these people have broken the law. I would be willing as a citizen to forgive whatever things they did as far as keeping it secret. But then we get into the possibility that, as David Grush has spoken about, people were murdered to keep the secret. And if that's the case, no, I do not want to give those people immunity. And what's the other word? To give somebody basically forgive their sins. I mean, like I said, I can forgive the secrecy sins, some of that, but nothing if they killed anybody. And that we need to figure out how to handle that.
Yeah. Absolutely understand and agree. So then we get to 2023 October, the SOL conference, which was probably an unprecedented conference, right? Because for the first time, you have a conference on the topic of UAP research held at Stanford University, co-financed by the Stanford, what's the name of the faculty? The Stanford School of Medicine.
Yeah, I believe that's what it is.
And where you had incredible scientists, politicians, military personnel, historians, religious study professors, etc., etc. And it was an attempt to start a research, let's say, study field, or I don't know how to define it in English, apologies, but to basically start approaching this topic in a scientific way. And the objective of SOL, if I'm not mistaken, is actually the creation of policy papers to inform government agencies and politicians and scientists on how this topic should be covered, how legislation should be made, etc., etc., etc. For me, that was an historical event. I attended. I've asked to be able to attend because I really wanted to see firsthand what was going on, and I was extremely positively surprised by the way the conference was organized and the way it developed. I welcome your point of view on this, and then I also welcome your point of view on what happens next. So since that conference, what have you seen in terms of progress or not progress?
Yeah, I think a big part of that conference is letting people know that it's okay to study this, like academics, because Dr. Gary Nolan said afterwards there were people who wanted more information. There were people who attended there. I mean, they don't want their names used, but they're interested to the point where they're attending that conference. And he's had more people. He said when he goes and speaks and talks about his cancer research, the people at the conference or the event where he is, they want to hear about the UAP stuff. They're like, can you please talk about UAP? He's like, yeah. He goes, I don't really have time. We'll have to come back for that. But yeah, the people are getting more interested, and that's the biggest issue because we need academics to talk about this. And I go beyond science when I tweet and when I write, but the basic level of just attacking this from the scientific level will get more people interested. And it's funny because Nolan said that Stanford was more than supportive. They're like, yeah, say that we're sponsoring this, which is unlike the 90s conference with MIT, I think it's Massachusetts Institute of Technology.
Yeah.
They held,
yeah.
I think it was the one with John Mack, and it was about abductions. I don't think they had another one. I think that was the one. And they were like, you can have it here, but we're not sponsoring this, just to be clear. And SOL was the opposite, where Stanford was like, yeah, we're sponsoring it. Yes, we are proud to have you here. So that's a big change. Obviously, it's a difference from abductions to basic science, but it's still a change. And as far as has it made a difference? I don't know if it's made a difference in our world. Privately, from when you listen to Gary Nolan, yes, it's making a difference because more people, more scientists and more academics are getting interested in this and being less afraid of studying this. Where do we go after this? We need to see. Right now, we're waiting to see what the next NDAA is. Basically, for people who don't know, it's the National Defense Authorization Act, and basically it funds anything defense related in the United States government. So we're waiting to see if there's more language like there was last year. Last year was amazing. 23 or 24 times they mentioned non-human intelligence. They didn't say the word bodies, but they're talking about that stuff. They're talking about craft, and they're talking about crash retrievals. They're talking about stuff we never thought would be in legislation. We want to see if that gets revisited, and this time if it passes, because last time we all know what happened. It was a group of Republicans, and this really has not been. It's not been political, but last year it was a group, two or three Republicans who helped kill it. So we're waiting to see what happens with that. And the next big shoe to drop is Lou Elizondo's book. We know that's coming in August. We want to see I have no idea what's going to be in his book. I have no idea what Lou has held back that he's going to be putting in that book. So that's the next thing. And also a documentary. I'm not big on documentaries making a difference because I haven't seen obvious differences made by other documentaries that we've seen. People are more interested and they're educated when they watch, but apparently, allegedly, according to David Fravor, this one is going to be a quote unquote game changer. We'll see. I'm skeptical, Antonio. I'm skeptical because I want to see what's going to be in it. We'll see who's in it. Maybe we'll get some big names that come out and say, this is real. That would be a big deal if we get names of respected people who worked in our government saying this is real and crash retrievals are real. I mean, we had that with Carl Nell, but it didn't really have much of an effect. So I don't know what else you expect coming forward, hopefully, or what you hope for, but that's where I am.
Well, I think I'm still waiting for the article from Grash. It was supposed to be an editorial that unfortunately hasn't come out yet, maybe for approval reasons on the DOPSR approval process. So David Grash basically released, after he testified in Congress in July 2023, after a few months, he actually said, okay, I'm allowed now to also say something more that I wasn't approved to say earlier, and what I can say is that I have some direct knowledge. So clearly I'm waiting for more information from Grash to come out on what direct knowledge he actually has. We can suspect because it was part of those agencies that we mentioned. So at a minimum, I suspect that he saw pictures and videos and radars and data coming from satellites at a minimum, but who knows?
And I think the reason why that was being held, it was my speculation, which might be right, is because they were talking about adding him to the staff if they had a select committee, basically a select committee to study UAP where they would have subpoena power. If that actually took place, they were talking about adding Grush and others to the staff. And if that happened, I think they were going to hold back on the op-ed. But right now there's nothing happening. So I don't know. I do not have any inside information on that op-ed. Hopefully we get to see it.
So last couple of questions and then I'll let you go. Okay. The first one is, so you have developed a lot of relationships with journalists in particular, etc. Anything that you can say about what you might expect also happening, and any surprise that we can expect in the next few weeks from insiders, whether or not the new hearing are going to be held, or any insider information that you can share?
Yeah, I don't have anything. I don't have anything for you. The people I have spoken to are conservative with what they expect going forward. And it's not just journalists, it's people who work in the world of intelligence. It's been quiet lately on that front. So, and for me, I used to share as much as I possibly could, and I still will do that when I hear things, but I really haven't heard much lately. And I don't want to ever, I want to stop being the guy who's saying, I heard this, so this is about to happen possibly, because there are things I've heard in the past that didn't happen. And then we've seen it from other people saying, by this time, this year, you're going to get this, and it doesn't happen. And it hurts the cause because people get so disappointed and they start flipping to, I've seen it so many times. People become these, I wouldn't say debunkers, but they start getting really cynical. I mean, I would put myself in that case too, because in that category too, for some stuff, because I see stuff where people are like, we don't have the firsthand witnesses. We have so much of somebody told me this. That's not enough. It's interesting for us, but for the people who I know who really don't have an interest in this, to get them interested, it's going to take a lot more than, well, somebody told me they had this experience and somebody told me they did this. We keep seeing a lot of that. And I don't think it's a good thing to keep doing that. And I know a lot of people have tuned it out. If you see on Twitter stuff that people before, like last year, if they would have heard something, they would say, that's really exciting. And then it didn't happen. And this year when they hear it, they're like, yeah, let me know when it happens. I'm really skeptical. People are jaded right now. So we really, really need a firsthand witness to come forward to help change things. And maybe that will get the Washington Post and the New York Times to cover crash retrievals, because without that, they're not going to cover it. So I'm trying to think of anything otherwise information. It may not be recent, but let me think. Inside information. I don't really have anything right now. And I'm okay with that. In the past, I was like just dying to get something inside, something that I knew that nobody else knew that I could share part of. But this time, I'm not as interested in getting that. I just want the information to come out. If something comes out tomorrow that I had no idea was coming, that's fine. I'll be surprised just like everybody else, and I'm perfectly fine with that.
So then, if I had to ask you the same question, the interviewer of the SOL conference asked Gary Nolan last year and Carl Nell this year about, in a scale 0 to 100%, you, Joe, how confident are that this thing is real, that this is not all a mistake, a misunderstanding, but actually non-human intelligence is real, has been in contact, etc., etc.
And I do go through that in my head. I'm like, is it possible that after studying this since the mid-90s that I have totally deluded myself and made something that's really not there? No, I'd say 100% is fine that we're dealing with something anomalous on this planet. And sometimes I say non-human or presenting itself as non-human. It certainly seems like we're dealing with something non-human. 100% something anomalous that we don't understand. And I don't think it's black technology. I don't think it's our technology. Anything else after that is speculation. Although I did say the other day, I think it's above us on the food chain, but that's because Lou keeps hinting at that. He keeps hinting that, how would you react if everything you knew, everything you were taught at Sunday school, everything you were taught at the dinner table turns out to be not exactly true. I mean, he was so serious when he was talking about that. He's like, what if we're not at the top of the food chain? What if we're somewhere in the middle? What if we're like the animals in a zoo? It's almost like he's preparing us for that. For somebody, I think for you and I, if that turned out to be the case, we'd be okay with it. But like I said, the masses, I don't know. Scale of 1 to 10, we're dealing with something non-human. I'd say 10, but with the caveat that it could be something human, maybe future humans that are coming across as non-human for whatever reason, but it's definitely not something. We're dealing with something that's not part of our society, and we have been since at least the 40s, and maybe for hundreds or thousands of years. I don't know if it goes that far back. It's really hard to tell because we can't interview people from hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago. I do not think we wasted our time. I do think we'll get some answers before we die. Younger people in their 20s, the millennial, are they millennials? No, there's a new generation. Z, is it?
Gen Z.
They may get more answers than we are. For the longest time, I thought we would have answers. I thought we would have answers by the year 2000. I was like, that was the big year. We're going to find out. There's going to be disclosure. There are old interviews of me talking, but I was skeptical back then. I'm like, we'll see. Over the years, you learn to not get excited. I mean, I still get excited when David Grush came out. How could you not get excited? I don't ever want to be in the position. If I'm ever in the position where big news comes out and I'm not excited on some level, then I should probably stop studying this topic, because that's the fun part of it. As much as there may be a negative aspect to it, it's fun. Otherwise, why would I spend so many hours on this? Also, why would I spend so many hours on it if I didn't think this was legit? When I was working on Wilson Davis, that was one thing. I was in touch with Eric Davis, and I was friends with him at the time. I was pretty close friends with him, and he knew. I said, I'm working on a really massive piece on Wilson Davis. I'm 100% confident that he would have said, if he knew it was bogus, and a lot of people who are watching this might not know what we're talking about, but if he knew it was bogus,
he would say, don't waste your time.
Don't waste your time. He could have easily said that. So, and I've learned since then, I've developed sources that I know 100% he did interview Admiral Wilson. Whether or not Wilson told him the truth or whether or not Wilson was told the truth, I don't know, but I know he interviewed him. That's a big witness. That is a big witness. If we ever get him coming forward, would be huge. It doesn't answer the questions. It doesn't prove anything, but it would be a big deal if he said, yeah. And if you want to just touch on it really quick, we can. I don't know if you've ever touched on this with your viewers.
Yeah, you can. Go ahead. No, I didn't, and it's another piece of the puzzle that is extremely compelling.
I'll do a really short version. In 1997, Dr. Stephen Greer, who's very controversial, went to the Pentagon with Will Miller, who's also a friend of mine. Edgar Mitchell.
It was a Captain Miller, right?
He was Commander. Was it Commander?
In the Navy?
Commander Will Miller and Edgar Mitchell, the sixth man to walk on the moon, and two other people. And they met with Admiral Thomas Wilson, who was the I'm trying to think, the deputy of intelligence. J2. Yeah, J2 for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was in line to become the director of the DIA. He wasn't at that point. He was an admiral. And they met with him because he wanted a briefing. Greer had contacted him, or Will Miller had contacted him. Will Miller knew him. And basically they briefed him on UFOs, and they said, you should look for the crash retrieval program. They left. Will Miller goes and looks. Admiral Wilson goes and looks through all the stuff, talks to people, finds the program, goes out to where this program is located, talks to the people who operate the program director, the attorney, and
the head of security.
What was it?
The head of security of the program.
Head of security, program manager, and the attorney. And basically they told him, yeah, this is a program. We have an intact craft, not from this earth, not made of human hands. And that's what our program is. And he said, give me a tour. I'm in a position where you should be giving me a tour. And they said, nope, we're not giving you a tour. You do not have a need to know. We're not reading you into this program. So he fought it. And when he fought it, he was threatened with the loss of a star, early retirement. I forget what else basically administrative terrorism. Basically, if you keep going forward with this, you're not going to get your pension, that kind of stuff. So that was 97. And then in 2019, these notes leaked online, and it was a conversation allegedly in 2002, 5 years after Greer and Miller met with Wilson. It was 2002, where Dr. Eric Davis, an astrophysicist, was interviewing Admiral Wilson in Las Vegas in a car and saying, can you tell me more details about what happened in 1997 when you found this program? And that's what the notes are. Basically, Wilson telling him some details, and then some details he would not share. And those notes leaked in 2019, basically showing, oh, look, this admiral was denied access to a crash retrieval program, kind of like David Grush would tell us about last year. And then I asked Eric about them. I said, can you comment on this? And he said, no comment. And Eric is very talkative. So I knew there was something up for him to say no comment. So it's been a debate. Are these real notes? Are these fake? Did Eric Davis write them up as a movie script, which was ridiculous? Was Eric Davis fooled by a fake Admiral Wilson imposter? Ridiculous. So yeah, the notes, no doubt the notes are real. And it basically says the same thing as David Grush says. These programs exist. This program exists. There were other programs, related programs. And unless you're on that list, it doesn't really matter who you are. Even if you're the deputy director of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs, even if you're that high, you're not getting read into this program. And that's been the issue. Even back in 2000, when I spoke with Bill Miller on a TV show, we were talking about the same thing, access to programs. It's been going on for a long time. And apparently Congress still doesn't have access to these programs. That's where we are. And whether or not they'll break through and get that access and then tell us that, like if Chuck Schumer came on the Senate floor and said, ladies and gentlemen, I got access today. They have a UFO, a flying saucer, and I saw the bodies. It's real. I don't know if we'll get to that in my lifetime. That's something I can dream about. But yeah, that's the whole Wilson Davis thing. And I don't remember why I even brought it up at this point.
No, as another important topic. And there is some technicality here that I think it's important to clarify. So, because a lot of people say, okay, if these programs are real, why are they so difficult to actually find? And
yes.
This is part of the way the Department of Defense, the intelligence community in the US actually hide these kind of programs. And so the allegation, and I'm going to call it an allegation, is that these activities of trying to reverse engineering UFOs are concealed inside what they called WUSA, Waived Unacknowledged Special Access Program. Now, this is a very important detail that a lot of people, even the people that know about it, but glist when they want to make an argument about it. Basically, a special access program is a program that is devised to manage activities of the Department of Defense, they're building a new missile, a new intercontinental hypersonic missile. They put it inside multiple special access programs where different special access programs cover different parts of the technology. And they compartmentalize them to avoid that a group of people know everything about the entire program. This way, they make sure that they control the flow of information. On top of normal SAPs, special access programs, you have the unacknowledged special access program. So these are programs that cannot even be disclosed to be in existence. And people that are read into this program need to lie. They must lie if they're asked whether this program exists, because if they admit it, they go to prison, right? They are unacknowledged. On top of the unacknowledged, you have the waived. Waived unacknowledged means that there's not even reporting to the normal commissions inside the Senate and the Congress. It means that only very few people know about these programs. Allegedly, these UFO crash retrieval programs are hidden inside a number of waived, unacknowledged special access programs where only a handful of people know what's going on. So that's the allegation that needs to be proven.
And Senator Rounds was saying, and I think Senator Gillibrand may have said this too, they're worried about exposing the traditional special access programs. I think they're hinting, they're not saying it, but like you said, if you go looking for the crash retrieval program, somebody will show you the top special access program. Here you go. It's not about aliens. Meanwhile, it's buried underneath that program. And if you don't know that, you're going to be like, okay, I was wrong. There's no aliens. There's no UFO programs here. So they're worried about exposing the prosaic program because it's black. It is black technology. It's very secretive technology. It's kind of a brilliant way to do it, because now you have the senators saying, I don't want to give these secrets up to the adversaries. I'll back off. Meanwhile, you dig a little deeper, and that's where you're going to find the alleged non-human stuff. And they need to figure that out, because that's not a good enough reason not to look. Because saying, well, I don't want to give up our secrets. Well, we're not telling you to give up our secrets, but get the right people who have the right clearances to look below the surface and then tell us what you find. That's a problem. I don't know where we're going to go with that, how they're going to get around that. But like I said, we don't want to know about those programs, the prosaic ones. We don't want to give up secrets to our adversaries. That's not what we're concerned about. We're concerned about anything related with UFOs. So yeah, that's where we are right now. But it's going to be interesting going forward to see. We should be hearing more from Congress in the next few weeks. Matt Laszlo has done a great job getting us updates, and you'll start seeing the language from the NDAA relatively soon. So if we're going to get it this year, we'll know about it relatively soon. So that's good. That's encouraging, and let's hope it happens.
Great. So let's close here with one recommendation. If you had to recommend to both people that know nothing about this topic and people that have been following this topic for quite some time, a list of your top 5 books to get up to speed, what would those books be?
Just for the history, as you said, Richard Dolan's books, UFOs in the National Security State. He was a historian, and he dove into the UFO topic, has done a great job documenting in great detail the history of this topic. If you want to go a little further and your mind is open, one of my favorite, there are 2 books that if you have an open mind, you should read. Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, which details the OSAP program for 2 years of what happened and how they studied UFOs and anything related. They did not filter out anything, even if it sounded ridiculous. And then John Keel's book is such an important book, and he goes into the history also. He doesn't just go into some of the more esoteric areas. He starts out with the history. And I think, I can't say it for sure because I haven't read it, but Lou's book, I think, is going to be on the top list of everything. Hopefully it's a book that'll just blow our minds, but I don't know. I haven't read it. I don't have an advanced copy. So we'll see. And there's also one more book, if I could find it. It was written by Robert Powell. Oh, Robert Powell has a new book, but I have not read that yet. But there's another book that was recommended to me. I've skimmed through it, and it's one of the more important books. Michael Villa, who I've interviewed several times, told me about this book, and it's supposed to be one of the best books. And like I said, I haven't read it. I've thumbed through it, but it goes through a lot of documents in the history. It's called UFOs and Government, a Historical Inquiry. Michael D. Swords and Robert Powell. I believe there are other authors, but that's enough to keep people busy for a while.
Okay, I'll add 2 to this list, which is really great. I'm reading right now Skinwalker, the Pentagon, but I'm gonna add 2 more. Which one is UFO from Leslie Kean, and the reason why I'm adding that is because Leslie covers a lot of the international cases. So a lot of people say UFO, why do they crash only in the US? No, this is a global phenomenon, and Leslie Kean's book covers cases in Spain, in Italy, in the Netherlands, in Germany, in the UK. So gives a really global perspective on this phenomenon. And then the final one is from our friends Ross Coulthard, In Plain Sight, because that covers relatively recent history, and it's also an introduction to this journalist that is doing a lot of work on the topic. Joe, thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome, and I agree with both of those books. I loved Ross's books, and Leslie's book is excellent too. But thank you for having me on, Antonio, and hopefully we'll get to meet again soon.
Thank you very much, Joe. I really appreciate your time. Have a lovely rest of the week.
You too.
Bye.